The privately owned Federal Reserve banks don't loan anything of value to Congress. They aren't banks. They're really an overpaid, powerful private accounting service. When that $800 billion worth of ink is transferred to the Treasury, it gets piled on top of the existing national debt. This is how the magical money machine works. Congress overspends. It borrows from this accounting firm called the Fed, and then turns around and tells you to pay for these crimes against the people. In other words, Congress basically pays the bills with Social Security taxes and borrowed ink from the private Fed. Pretty slick scam, wouldn't you say? The people of America are also responsible to a large degree for this out-of-control spending. Americans have been bred to a welfare-dependent mentality. Special interest groups who have no interest in the U.S. Constitution demand that billions of dollars be spent on their pet interests. Billions upon billions of dollars have been unconstitutionally thrown to foreign governments, some days our friend, a week later our enemy. They are only our friend as long as the U.S. throws money at their corrupt governments. Billions of dollars have unconstitutionally been spent on grants to colleges and universities, which in turn sell their research to the highest bidder, paid for by the sweat off the back of the little guy out in America. No, they don't return any back to the little guy who funded these studies and research programs. They keep all the money. As long as the American people themselves condone continued unconstitutional spending by Congress, the longer they will violate their oath of office and continue to fund unconstitutional expenditures, placing your children and grandbabies in a state of unpayable massive debt. Unless the people themselves demand an end to this insanity, our economy eventually will collapse under the weight of this massive unpayable debt, no matter how much ink the privately owned Fed transfers into the coffers of the U.S. Treasury. The pain of withdrawal from unlawful government handouts will be far less now than it will be down the road. And don't forget this. The Federal Reserve issues stock to Class A stockholders, but you know what? Neither you nor I can own any stock in this private banking cabal. Only the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and other international families own up all the stock. And if you think that they aren't privately owned, the federal courts have ruled that the Federal Reserve banking system indeed is a collection of privately held banks. They only cleverly and deceptively use the word federal to make people think that this private banking cartel is part of our government when they aren't. America became the greatest debt-free nation on earth by a resourceful, independent, self-reliant people. Sadly, today we have a large percentage of our population who can't get through the day without a government memo telling them how, step by step, with the redistribution of average ordinary Americans' assets into the hands of the unproductive. A very sad commentary to what made our nation great and prosperous. But I heard the debt is being paid down. What you heard and reality are two separate issues altogether. The politicians must continue to fool the American people, lest they catch on to this chicanery. Let's have a look at the numbers so that you can see that any utterance that the national debt has been paid down X billions of dollars is nothing more than bombastic gas passed from one administration to the next and the latest recycled Congress. In the chart below, an R next to the amount indicates a Republican president. A D is for a Democrat in the Oval Office. The Democrats had control of Congress from 1954 until the illusion billed as the Republican Revolution in 1994. Both houses of Congress were Republican-controlled until after the 2000 election, but this ended when in May 2001 James Jeffords fessed up to his real political agenda. Now, for the sake of these CDs and one for the road, it's difficult to give you the exact numbers to the penny. However, I will try to do my best here. As of August 2001, the congressionally created national debt was $5.7 trillion with a Republican in the White House. And it continues to escalate. Right now, with the Republican in the White House, it is $7.9 trillion. But if you go back to 2003, it was let's see, let me go back to a Democratic president. September 30th, 1996, it was $5.2 trillion under a Democrat. So it doesn't really matter. And again, if you can see the numbers, these statistics were obtained from the Bureau of the Public Debt's website. As you can see, it doesn't matter which party is in office. There is no surplus, and the debt cannot be paid down. It can only grow exponentially as long as Congress and the president have the central bank at their fingertips. A balanced budget is nothing more than good political rhetoric, but in reality, it's a pipe dream strictly for public consumption. How can you balance your budget if you have no money to spend and are trillions of dollars in the hole? You can't. It's just another well-crafted illusion to keep the masses pacified. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but the American people have awakened to this monumental theft and are demanding the only real solution that can be implemented. Abolish the central bank and return to a constitutional monetary system with no income tax. We had no income tax before 1913 because we had no central bank. 1913 was a bad year for America. We had the fraudulent ratification of the 16th Amendment, the so-called Income Tax Amendment. It was not ratified. Mr. Bill Benson went to all 48 states' legislatures at the time that the vote was taken. He has 17,000 court-certified documents that prove that the 16th Amendment, or the so-called Income Tax Amendment, was never ratified. He did the 17th Amendment at the same time. It was not ratified. And in December of 1913, the international bankers got their way, and these duplicitous, deceitful senators got the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 through. It was signed into law, and America has gone down the road of debt ever since. No Fed, no need for a direct tax. Without the central bank siphoning off the wealth of our nation, there would be no need for a personal income tax. Don't be fooled by this chant around the country for a flat tax, a consumption tax, sales tax, or any other kind of personal income tax. There is absolutely no authority in the U.S. Constitution to implement any of these forms of taxation without apportionment. It is for this reason and this reason alone that when it became apparent that the 16th Amendment was not going to be ratified by the states, fraud was committed and it was simply proclaimed ratified by then Secretary of State Philander Chase Knox. We don't need any direct taxation, and these popular mantras are just new lies to replace old lies. Any one of these forms of taxation will still feed the cancer, the central bank. Any one of these forms of taxation is just another way to fleece the American people to enrich the pockets of the international banking cartel. Please consider the words of Congressman Ron Paul. Quote, "Strictly speaking, it probably is not necessary for the federal government to tax anyone directly. It could simply print the money it needs. However, that would be too bold a stroke, for it would then be obvious to all what kind of counterfeiting operation the government is running. The present system combining taxation and inflation is akin to watering the milk. Too much water and the people catch on," unquote. What we need to do is take away the magical money machine called the Fed, which Andrew Jackson did. It was a major battle back then, but this man had courage that no politician in Washington has today. We need to get rid of the privately owned Federal Reserve, which will force Congress to live within its means and fund only those activities specifically enumerated by the supreme law of the land in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, which you can read in any encyclopedia, law library, and I'm not going to take the time to read all of that on the CD right now. There is absolutely no authority for the federal government to legislate in areas of the environment, education, the NEA, the FDA, and many others. It may surprise you to find out that agencies such as the FDA, DEA, and the EPA all derive their jurisdiction from international treaties.